You want me to give up my national scholarship slot for her again, I said loudly, and the whole senior assembly went dead quiet. Vanessa Blake stood 3 feet in front of me with a folded prep course bill in one hand and my printed recommendation form in the other. Her glossy smile cracked. Derek Walsh leaned against the edge of the stage with his football jacket hanging open and his rich boy grin already loaded. Mr. Grant, our senior counselor, held the microphone near his chest like he could still control the room. Vanessa lifted her chin and said softly, "Ethan, don't make this ugly. You know I need this chance more than you do." I stepped closer and snatched my recommendation form out of her hand. Chairs scraped. Someone gasped. Derek laughed loudly. "Come on, grease boy, you fix cars after school anyway. Work one more shift and let Vanessa have a real future." I held up the form so every senior in Westbridge High could see my name printed across the top. I said coldly, "No, I'm done burning my future to keep hers warm." Vanessa's eyes widened. She pressed the prep course bill against her sweater and whispered, "Ethan, please, my mom can't pay for this. You promised you'd help me." I pointed at the paper in her hand. I said sharply, "I promised to tutor you for 2 weeks. You turned that into 2 years of free homework, free essays, free project work, and free money." The back rows started murmuring. Vanessa shook her head fast. Vanessa said weakly, "That's not true." Derek pushed off the stage and walked toward me. Derek snapped, "Watch your mouth. Vanessa doesn't need to steal from you." I reached into my backpack, pulled out a thick folder, and slammed it on the nearest chair. The slap echoed through the auditorium. I said, "Then she won't mind if I show everybody." "Mr. Grant," barked into the microphone, "Ethan Miller, sit down right now." I turned toward him. I said, "No, sir. Last time I sat down, you took my slot." The auditorium froze again. "Mr. Grant's face twitched." Vanessa whispered, "Last time." I opened the folder and held up the first page. I said loudly, "Text message, September 3rd, Vanessa asked me to write the first draft of her college essay because," and I quote, "you sound smarter when you write." Mike Reynolds stood up from the third row and shouted, "Read the next one, Ethan." I flipped the page. I said, October 12th. She asked me to skip my practice SAT to help her rebuild her science fair model. Vanessa lunged forward. Vanessa hissed, "Give me that." I stepped back. Mike blocked her with one arm. Mike said sharply, "Touch him and I'll make sure the principal sees the camera feed." Derek shoved Mike's shoulder. Derek growled, "Move." Mike shoved him back. Mike barked, "Try me, trust fund." Mr. Grant stormed down the aisle. Mr. Grant snapped, "This is a scholarship assembly, not a circus." I held up the third page before he reached me. I said, November 6th, I paid $480 for Vanessa's prep class. She wrote, "I'll pay you back after admissions." She never paid me back. A girl in the second row muttered, "Wait, she said her church paid for that." Vanessa spun around. Vanessa cried, "Why are you doing this to me?" I looked at the seniors, then at Mr. Grant. I said, "Because today she wanted my recommendation slot, my essay help, and another $700, and because Mr. Grant was about to tell me a real man knows how to sacrifice." Mr. Grant's shoes stopped halfway down the aisle. Principal Marsh stood near the side door with her arms crossed. Ms. Harper, my math teacher, stood beside her with a clipboard. Mr. Grant forced a laugh. Mr. Grant said tightly, "That is not what I was going to say." I reached into my pocket and pressed play on my phone. Mr. Grant's voice crackled through the auditorium speaker after Mike plugged my phone into the AV jack. Mr. Grant's recorded voice said, "Ethan, you're gifted. Vanessa represents the school better. Colleges notice polish. You need to learn when to step aside." The room erupted. Vanessa covered her mouth. Derek cursed. Mr. Grant shouted, "Turn that off." I let it play 3 more seconds, then unplugged it. I said, "No more stepping aside." Principal Marsh walked to the front. Principal Marsh said firmly, "Mr. Miller, bring those materials to my office after the assembly." Derek smirked. Derek said, "There it is, you're done." Principal Marsh turned on him. Principal Marsh said, "Mr. Walsh, sit down before I call your father and tell him why his name keeps coming up in a student recommendation review." Derek's smirk died. I closed the folder, kept my form in my hand, and walked back to my seat. Vanessa stood in the aisle, still holding her unpaid bill. Vanessa called after me, "Ethan, you're going to regret humiliating me." I stopped without turning around. I said, "No, Vanessa, I already regretted helping you." Mike slapped the seat beside him. Mike said, "About time, man." I sat down. The rest of the assembly went through the motions. Mr. Grant read names like he was chewing glass. When he reached mine, his voice came out flat. Ethan Miller, National Merit Academic Challenge nominee. Nobody clapped at first. Then Ms. Harper clapped once. Mike clapped harder. A few students joined in. Vanessa stayed standing until Principal Marsh told her to sit. After the bell, the hallway turned into a courtroom. Phones were out. Whispers moved faster than lockers slamming. Vanessa's friend Amber blocked my path. Near the trophy case, Amber snapped, "You could have talked to her privately." I held my folder against my side. I said, "She asked for my spot publicly." Amber pointed at me. Amber said, "She's under pressure." Mike stepped beside me. Mike said, "So is Ethan's family. Funny how nobody passed a collection bucket for him." Derek came around the corner with 3 guys from the team. Derek said loudly, "Miller, you better delete that recording." I opened my locker and grabbed my calculus book. I said, "Already copied it." Derek's jaw tightened. Derek said, "You think being good at tests makes you untouchable?" I shut my locker. I said, "No, I think evidence makes liars sweat." Students nearby laughed under their breath. Derek stepped closer. His shoulder bumped mine. I didn't move. Mike raised his phone. Mike said, "Smile, Derek. Your dad loves school spirit." Derek stared at the camera, then backed away. Vanessa walked past us with red eyes and a perfect wounded look. Vanessa said quietly, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "I hope getting revenge makes you happy." I answered at the same volume, "I hope doing your own work teaches you something." A few seniors laughed. Vanessa's face hardened for half a second, then she covered it with a shaky breath and hurried off. By lunch, the first post hit the school forum. The title read, "Ethan Miller humiliates Vanessa Blake after she rejects him." Mike shoved his phone in front of me while we stood in the cafeteria line. Mike said angrily, "She works fast." I read the first lines. Vanessa claimed I had been obsessed with her since sophomore year, that I offered help, then turned cruel when she wouldn't date me. I handed the phone back and picked up a tray. I said, "Print shop open." Mike grinned. Mike said, "Always." We skipped the line, went to the library printer, and printed 27 pages, payment screenshots, essay drafts with my comments, project files with timestamps, texts where she asked for help, texts where she called Derek useful but dumb. Mike whistled at that one. Mike said, "Oh, this one needs its own frame." I said, "Print 3 copies." At 12:21, the cafeteria was packed. Vanessa sat at the center table with Amber and half the cheer squad around her. Derek sat beside her like a bodyguard with a credit card. I walked to the announcement board beside the lunch counter and pinned the first page, then the next, then the next. Conversation dropped row by row. Amber stood up. Amber shouted, "What are you doing?" I kept pinning pages. I said, "Correcting the record." Vanessa jumped up and rushed over. Vanessa cried, "Those are private." I turned and held up the essay draft. I said loudly, "Then why did you submit private work under your name?" The cafeteria roared. Derek came fast, grabbed for the papers, and Mike stepped in front of him. Mike snapped, "You rip one page, I upload all of it." Derek said through his teeth, "You're dead, Reynolds." Mike pointed to the security dome above the soda machine. Mike said, "On camera, genius." Vanessa snatched one page and froze when she saw which one it was. Her own message sat printed in black ink. "Can you make my essay sound less basic? You're better with poor people struggle stuff." A senior named Carla read it over Vanessa's shoulder and said, "Wow." Vanessa's cheeks went white. I took the page from her hand and pinned it back up. I said, "That's the part she wanted me to write for her. A struggle story." Someone from the football table called out, "Damn, Vanessa." Amber yelled, "Everybody shut up, Ethan's twisting this." I pulled out my phone and played the voice memo Vanessa sent 3 months earlier. Vanessa's recorded voice said, "Ethan, please just write the opening. You know how to make poverty sound noble." I don't know how to say it without sounding fake. The cafeteria exploded. Vanessa slapped the phone out of my hand. It skidded under a chair. Mike grabbed it and held it up. Mike said, "Still recording, Principal." Marsh's voice cut across the noise. Principal Marsh said, "Everyone back to your tables." She walked in with Ms. Harper and the vice principal. Mr. Grant was right behind them, sweating at the collar. Vanessa turned instantly. Vanessa sobbed, he's attacking me. I pointed to the board. I said, no, I'm documenting academic dishonesty, Mr. Grant snapped. You are creating a hostile environment, MS. Harper stepped to the board and read 2 pages without blinking. MS. Harper said, this needs to go to the academic review committee, Mr. Grant shot her a look. Mr. Grant said, we can handle it internally. I said, like you handled my recommendation. Principal Marsh looked at me. Principal Marsh said, Mr. Miller, office, now. MS. Harper, bring the documents, Derek said under his breath. Rat. I turned back. I said, thief. His chair scraped hard. The vice principal pointed at him. Vice Principal Cole said, sit, Derek. In the office, Vanessa cried without tears. Her mother arrived in 18 minutes wearing sunglasses and carrying a designer purse. Derek's father called the school before Derek even got there. Mr. Grant sat beside Vanessa like her lawyer. MS. Harper sat beside me with the folder open. Principal Marsh folded her hands. Principal Marsh said, we are reviewing 2 matters. First, the scholarship nomination. Second, potential academic misconduct. Vanessa's mother leaned forward. Mrs. Blake said, my daughter is a straight-A student and a community volunteer. This boy has clearly targeted her. I slid a page across the table. I said, that's her asking me to rewrite her volunteer essay because she only went twice. Mrs. Blake didn't pick it up. Vanessa whispered, I was overwhelmed. MS. Harper said evenly, overwhelmed students ask for tutoring. They don't submit another student's writing. Mr. Grant cleared his throat. Mr. Grant said, we should be careful not to punish collaboration. Ethan and Vanessa have worked closely for years. I leaned forward. I said, then ask her to explain the final line of her science fair algorithm. Vanessa blinked. Mr. Grant frowned. I opened my laptop and turned it toward Principal Marsh. I said, her state fair submission used my model. Ask her what line 42 does. Principal Marsh looked at Vanessa. Principal Marsh said, Vanessa. Vanessa wiped her cheek. Vanessa said, it controls the output. MS. Harper said, what output? Vanessa looked at Mr. Grant. Mr. Grant said quickly, this is too technical for an office meeting. I tapped the screen. I said, it removes duplicate sensor readings from a low-cost soil moisture rig. She called it a climate equity predictor because that sounded better. MS. Harper pressed her lips together. Principal Marsh wrote something down. Mrs. Blake snapped, are you enjoying this? I answered, no, ma'am, I'm ending it. Derek arrived without knocking. Derek said, my dad says nobody signs anything until he speaks to the district. Principal Marsh looked over her glasses. Principal Marsh said, your father is not in this room, and you are not in this meeting. Derek pointed at me. Derek said, he's been stalking Vanessa. I pulled another page from the folder. I said, then why did you text me last week asking me to fix her scholarship essay before Friday? Derek froze. Mike had sent me that screenshot after lunch. Derek had used his own number. MS. Harper read it aloud. MS. Harper said, Derek Walsh, do the essay and I'll make sure people stop calling your dad a truck monkey. The air got sharp. Principal Marsh looked at Derek. Principal Marsh said, you can wait outside. Derek said, this is garbage. Vice Principal Cole appeared at the doorway. Vice Principal Cole said, outside. Derek kicked the doorframe on his way out. Principal Marsh turned back to me. Principal Marsh said, Mr. Miller, your nomination remains active while this is reviewed. MS. Blake's nomination is suspended pending investigation. Vanessa gasped. Mrs. Blake stood up. Mrs. Blake said, you cannot do that. Principal Marsh said, I just did. Mr. Grant stood too. Mr. Grant said, this will damage her college applications. MS. Harper said, so would fraud. Vanessa looked at me across the table. Vanessa whispered, please don't do this. I gathered my papers. I said, do your own work, Vanessa. That afternoon, my phone buzzed until the battery hit 4%. Half the school wanted details, the other half wanted me to shut up. At 3:10, I walked to Lawson's garage 6 blocks from school. Mr. Lawson had a Buick on the lift and a radio playing classic rock. He saw my face and tossed me a rag. Mr. Lawson said, school circus. I wiped oil off a wrench. I said, same clowns, louder tent. He laughed. Mr. Lawson said, you still coming Saturday? I said, yes, sir, but I'm cutting back after this month. national exam is in 7 weeks, Mr. Lawson nodded. Mr. Lawson said, good, your hands can fix cars, your brain can get you out from under them. At 4:02, Vanessa walked into the garage wearing a cream coat that did not belong near motor oil. Derek waited outside in his black SUV, engine running. Mr. Lawson looked over from the Buick. Vanessa said softly, can we talk? I kept tightening the battery terminal. I said, talk. Vanessa glanced at Mr. Lawson. Vanessa said, privately. Mr. Lawson barked, my garage, my ears. She folded her arms. Vanessa said, you've made your point. Please take the posts down. Colleges watch this stuff. I said, they also watch plagiarism. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Vanessa whispered, you don't understand what this could do to me. I clicked the wrench once. I said, I understand exactly. Vanessa's voice turned sharper. Vanessa snapped, you're punishing me because I didn't choose you. Mr. Lawson looked at me. I stood up and wiped my hands. I said clearly, you asked me for money, essays, homework, and a scholarship slot. Not once did you ask me for a date. Mr. Lawson laughed once. Vanessa flushed. Derek climbed out of the SUV and came into the garage. Derek said, you really want trouble in front of your boss. Mr. Lawson stepped around the Buick with a tire iron in his hand. Mr. Lawson said, kid, I've pulled engines heavier than your ego. Don't start. Derek stopped. I picked up my backpack. I said, Vanessa, your suspended nomination is between you and the school. Your fake essays are between you and the colleges. Your prep bill is between you and whoever actually owes it. That's not me. Vanessa's eyes went flat. Vanessa said, fine, then don't come crying when nobody at school talks to you. I said, I go there to graduate. Derek sneered, you'll graduate alone. Mike's voice came from the open garage door. Mike said, he's got me, idiot. Mike walked in eating chips from a crumpled bag. Derek rolled his eyes. Derek said, great, the pit crew. Mike tossed a chip at him. Mike said, better than being Vanessa's purse dog. Derek lunged, and Mr. Lawson slammed the tire iron against the concrete. The clang stopped everyone. Mr. Lawson shouted, out. Vanessa grabbed Derek's sleeve. Vanessa hissed, leave it. They left. Derek peeled out so hard the tires screamed. Mr. Lawson watched the SUV vanish. Mr. Lawson said, that boy drives like his insurance has rich parents. I went back to work. Mike leaned against a toolbox. Mike said, forum's on fire. I said, good. Mike said, bad fire too. Amber's saying you forged the messages. I said, then tomorrow we show metadata. Mike grinned. I love new words that make liars cry. The next morning, Amber waited by my locker with 2 cheerleaders and a crowd. She had printed her own poster, stop harassing Vanessa, big red letters. She slapped it on the locker beside mine. Amber said loudly, real men don't bully girls. I opened my locker. I said, real friends don't cover fraud. She shoved the poster against my chest. Amber snapped, apologize. I let the poster fall to the floor. I said, no. She stepped closer. Amber said, then we'll make sure every college sees who you really are. I pulled a flash drive from my pocket. I said, perfect. They can see the original files too. Amber hesitated. Vanessa appeared at the end of the hall, surrounded by students like she was arriving for a trial. Mr. Grant walked behind her. He pointed at me. Mr. Grant barked, Ethan, my office. I shut my locker. I said, no meeting without Ms. Harper. His face tightened. Mr. Grant said, you don't dictate terms to faculty. Ms. Harper's voice came from behind him. Ms. Harper said, he can request another staff member present. The hallway shifted. Mr. Grant turned slowly. Ms. Harper held a laptop bag and a stack of exam packets. Mr. Grant said coldly, you seem very invested. Ms. Harper said, in academic integrity. Yes. Mike whispered, round 2. In Mr. Grant's office, he tried a different tone. Mr. Grant said, Ethan, you're a bright young man, but this path could make you look vindictive. I placed the flash drive on his desk. I said, then review the files and clear it up. Vanessa sat in the corner, hands clasped. Vanessa said softly, I never meant to hurt you. I looked at Mr. Grant. I said, is that part of the review? Ms. Harper coughed once into her hand. Mr. Grant ignored her. Mr. Grant said, Vanessa's application profile is delicate. Your accusations could cost her scholarships, I said. Her actions could cost her scholarships. He leaned back. Mr. Grant said, you're not seeing the bigger picture. Westbridge has relationships with certain universities. Vanessa is a strong representative. I pulled out my phone. Mr. Grant stopped talking. I set it on the desk. Screen up, I said. Keep going. He glared. Mr. Grant said, are you recording me? I said. School policy says students may record meetings involving disciplinary matters if all parties are notified. Consider this notice. Ms. Harper looked at him. Ms. Harper said, he is correct. Vanessa's mouth tightened. Mr. Grant stood. Mr. Grant said, meeting over. I picked up the flash drive. I said, great, I'll submit this to Principal Marsh and the district office. He snapped. Sit down. I did not. I said, no, sir. Outside the office, Derek blocked the hallway. Derek said, you think Harper saves you? My dad paid for the new science wing. I walked past him. He grabbed my backpack strap. I spun, caught his wrist, and held it up where the security camera could see. I said loudly, take your hand off me. Students turned. Derek yanked his hand free. Derek said, you're scared. I pointed at the camera. I said, you're recorded. Mike yelled from the stairs. Again, laughter rolled down the hall. Derek shoved through the crowd and left. By Friday, the academic review committee met after school. Vanessa arrived with her mother. Derek arrived with his father, a red-faced man in an expensive suit. I arrived with my father in his work jacket, boots dusty from a truck yard. Dad shook Principal Marsh's hand. Dad said, ma'am. Mr. Walsh looked him up and down. Mr. Walsh said, this is getting ridiculous. These kids collaborated. My son says Miller has been unstable. Dad turned to me. Dad said, you unstable? I said, no, sir. Dad looked back. Dad said, there you go. Mike nearly choked trying not to laugh. Principal Marsh called us into the conference room. The committee reviewed the files on the projector, my drafts, Vanessa's submissions. Comments moved from my account into hers. Payment receipts. Mr. Walsh kept interrupting. Mr. Walsh said, teenagers share notes. Ms. Harper clicked to the next slide. It showed Vanessa asking, can you write the conclusion and make it sound like I care more? The room went silent. Dad looked at me, then at Vanessa. Dad said slowly, she made you write caring for her. Vanessa's mother snapped. Do not mock my daughter. Dad said, lady, I'm trying not to. The committee chair, Dr. Levin, adjusted his glasses. Dr. Levin said, Ms. Blake, did you submit any work substantially written by Ethan Miller? Vanessa whispered, he helped me. Dr. Levin said, that was not the question. Vanessa's eyes filled again. Vanessa said, I don't remember every draft. I said, I do. I clicked one more file. The document history opened. My name appeared on 83% of the edits. Dr. Levin leaned forward. Dr. Levin said, that is not tutoring. Mr. Grant shifted in his seat. Ms. Harper said, there's also the scholarship slot issue. Principal Marsh nodded. Mr. Miller's nomination remains. Ms. Blake's suspended status continues until the full review is complete. Mr. Walsh slapped the table. Mr. Walsh said, this school is making a mistake. Dad leaned forward, calm as a parked truck. Dad said, no, looks like the mistake was thinking my boy would keep quiet. Mr. Walsh stared at him. Dad stared back. Nobody moved. After the meeting, Dad and I walked to his old pickup. The passenger door squealed when I opened it. He started the engine twice before it caught. Dad said, you paid $480 for that girl. I buckled my seatbelt. I said, yes, sir. Dad said, you got a receipt? I said, yes, sir. Dad nodded. Dad said, good, never be generous without paperwork. We drove home with the heater rattling. At dinner, Mom set meatloaf on the table and asked for the whole story. She wore hospital cleaning shoes and had a bandage on one thumb. I laid out the facts. No drama, no soft parts. Mom put her fork down when I got to Derek's text about Dad. Mom said, truck monkey. Dad kept eating. Dad said, don't worry, rich kids run out of insults before working folks run out of miles. Mom pointed at me. Mom said, you study tonight. No more rescuing people who bite. I said, yes, ma'am. That night, I cleared my desk. Vanessa's old worksheets went into a trash bag. Her flashcards, her practice essays, her urgent notes, I carried the bag to the bin outside and dropped it in. The lid slammed. At 6:00 the next morning, I started a new schedule: school, practice exams, garage shift, more practice, sleep, repeat, no Vanessa calls, no emergency essays, no last-minute rides. On Monday, Vanessa waited near the library doors with a blue binder pressed to her chest. The hallway was mostly empty. She looked smaller without her crowd. Vanessa said softly, "Ethan, I have a calculus quiz tomorrow." I kept walking. She stepped in front of me. Vanessa said, "Please, just 1 hour, I can't fail this." I stopped. I said, "Ask Derek." She flinched. Vanessa said, "Derek doesn't understand math." I said, "That never bothered you when he understood money." She grabbed my sleeve. I pulled my arm back. I said loudly, "Don't touch me." She looked past me, and Derek came around the corner holding his phone low. I turned toward the library desk. Mess. Harper sat there with a stack of graded tests. Mike stepped out from behind the vending machine, also recording. Mike said, "Bad angle, Derek, try portrait mode." Derek froze. Vanessa released a sharp breath. Vanessa whispered, "You set me up." I said, "No, I stopped walking alone when liars got cameras." Ms. Harper stood. Ms. Harper said, "Vanessa, Derek, you need to leave this hallway." Derek hid his phone. Derek said, "We were just talking." Mike said, "Cool, then you won't mind showing the first 20 seconds. Derek said nothing. Ms. Harper looked at Vanessa. Ms. Harper said, "If you need academic help, submit a tutoring request through the office. Do not approach Ethan privately again." Vanessa's mouth trembled. Vanessa said, "Everybody treats me like a criminal now." I picked up my binder from the floor where she had bumped it. I said, "Then stop acting like one." The quiz came Tuesday. Vanessa stared at her paper like it was written in code. I finished in 18 minutes, checked every answer, and turned it in. Mr. Grant had been replaced in that class by a substitute. Because of the review, Vanessa watched me walk out. At lunch, scores posted. I got 100, Vanessa got 62. The hallway crowd reacted before she did. Amber whispered, "Maybe it was just a bad day." Mike pointed at the board. Mike said loudly, "For Ethan or for whoever used to do the work." Vanessa spun toward him. Vanessa snapped, "You're disgusting." Mike bowed. Mike said, "And yet I can divide fractions." Derek shoved the score sheet off the wall. Vice Principal Cole saw him do it. Cole said, "Pick it up." Derek said, "It fell." Cole said, "Pick it up." Derek picked it up while freshmen giggled. That Friday, the full-length practice SAT results came in. The school posted top 20 scores. My name sat at number 1 with a 1580. Vanessa was not on the list. Derek was not on the list. Mike was number 14 and acted like he had won the Super Bowl. Mike slapped the wall. Mike shouted, "Academic weapon. Baby." Vanessa came out of the counseling office with Mr. Grant behind her. She saw the list. Her face dropped. Derek walked up, looked at the names, and said too loudly, "Practice tests don't matter." I stood by the water fountain. I said, "Then why did Vanessa ask me to skip mine last year to help her study?" A junior nearby said, "Damn." Derek pointed at me. Derek said, "One score doesn't get you into Harvard." I said, "No, but it gets me away from you." Mr. Grant snapped, "Enough." Ms. Harper walked out of her classroom. Ms. Harper said, "Mr. Grant," the district asked that you avoid direct involvement with Ethan's academic file during review. The hallway went silent. Mr. Grant's neck reddened. He said, "I'm still employed here." Ms. Harper said, "Then follow the instruction." Mike whispered, "She cooked him." Vanessa tried a different route the next week. She started smiling again. She told students she wished me well. She told teachers I was under stress. She brought cupcakes to calculus. She asked Mr. Lawson if he could check on Ethan because he seemed angry. Mr. Lawson told her to buy a tire or leave. Then came the state academic fair registration deadline. My project was a low-cost farm sensor rig built from salvage parts, a cheap microcontroller, and code I had cleaned up every night after work. It measured soil moisture, predicted watering needs, and adjusted flow with parts a farmer could replace with a screwdriver. Derek called it hillbilly sprinklers. Vanessa called it cute. I kept receipts, version logs, photos, and backup drives. Every file had timestamps. Every test had video. Every prototype had my initials scratched under the base plate with a pocket knife. On a Wednesday afternoon, I walked into the lab and found cabinet 4 open. My old binder was gone, not the current one, the old one, the one with the early design that overheated after 6 minutes. I checked the lab sign-in sheet. A student assistant named Tyler had signed in during lunch. Tyler played backup receiver with Derek. Mike saw my face and walked over. Mike said, "Somebody stole something." I looked at the empty shelf. I said, "The wrong thing." Mike grinned slowly. Mike said, "That sounds like the right thing." I went to Ms. Harper's room and reported it. She filed the incident and asked if I wanted the lab locked down. I said no. She looked at me for 3 seconds, then nodded. Ms. Harper said, "You're documenting everything." I lifted my phone. I said, "Everything." The state preliminary fair happened in the Westbridge gym. Folding tables, poster boards, judges with clipboards, parents pretending not to brag. Vanessa arrived wearing a navy blazer and a white blouse, standing beside a polished display titled "Equitable Water Intelligence for Tomorrow." Derek carried the device like he had built it with his bare hands. I recognized my old casing. They had painted it white. Mike leaned over my table. Mike whispered, "They stole your toaster." I tightened one wire on my current rig. I said, "Watch the clock." Vanessa presented before me. She smiled at the judges. Vanessa said brightly, "My project empowers small agricultural communities with affordable predictive irrigation." A judge asked, "What sensor calibration method did you use?" Vanessa smiled wider. Vanessa said, "A community-based adaptive model." The judge blinked. "Could you explain that technically?" Derek jumped in. Derek said, "The algorithm adjusts automatically." The device made a clicking sound. Then another, then smoke curled from the side vent. A freshman shouted, "It's burning." Vanessa stepped back. Derek grabbed the plug and yanked it out. The gym laughed before the teachers could stop them. The judge lifted the casing with a pencil. Judge Patel said, "This wiring is unsafe." Vanessa stammered, "It worked earlier." I heard Mike mutter, "For 6 minutes, champ." Judge Patel looked at the project sheet. Judge Patel said, "Do you have development logs?" Vanessa handed over a thin binder. The judge flipped 3 pages. "These logs begin 4 days ago." Vanessa said, "I refined the concept quickly." My turn came 11 minutes later. I placed my rig on the table, connected it to 3 soil trays, and ran the sequence. Water moved through clear tubes in short controlled pulses. The cheap screen showed moisture levels, predicted needs, and power draw. Judge Patel watched the numbers. Judge Patel asked, "How long has this version been tested?" I handed him the log binder. I said, "Current build, 93 hours, earlier failed versions logged 2, he turned pages. He stopped at a photo of the old white painted casing before it was painted. Judge Patel looked toward Vanessa's table. Judge Patel said, "This looks familiar." I said, "Yes, sir." Vanessa's head snapped up. Derek cursed under his breath. Judge Patel called the other judges over. I opened my laptop and showed version history. Prototype A, overheated. Prototype B, unstable calibration. Prototype C, current, photos, dates, test videos, my initials under the base plates. Judge Patel picked up Vanessa's dead casing and looked underneath. There, under white paint scraped by heat, were my initials, E.M. The gym went quiet in a wave. Judge Patel said, "Ms. Blake, who built this device?" Vanessa's lips parted. Derek said, "We bought parts from the same supplier." I lifted my current rig and showed the underside. Same scratch mark, same hand, different prototype. I said, "That one disappeared from the school lab last week." Ms. Harper stepped forward with the incident report. Ms. Harper said, "A missing materials report was filed the day it vanished." Tyler, the student assistant, turned red near the bleachers. Vice Principal Cole walked straight toward him. Vanessa whispered, "I didn't know." Derek snapped, "Shut up." Everybody heard it. Judge Patel removed Vanessa's score sheet from the table. Judge Patel said, "This entry is disqualified pending review." Vanessa grabbed the table edge. Vanessa said, "Please. This fair matters for college." Judge Patel said, "So does honesty." My project won the state preliminary. 3 local farmers who had come for the community demo asked questions after the awards. One, Mr. Harlan, wore a seed company cap and carried hands cracked from work. Mr. Harlan said, "That thing really run on parts that cheap?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Bring it out Saturday." I'll give you a field row and a hose, Saturday morning. Dad drove me to Harlan's farm before sunrise. Mike came with a cooler and acted like he was the project manager. Mr. Harlan tested the rig on a greenhouse row with uneven soil. It adjusted water flow better than his timer system. He slapped his cap against his leg. Mr. Harlan said, "Boy, that's not a science fair toy, that's useful." Mike filmed the demo. He posted a short clip with the caption, "Westbridge kid builds irrigation rig from scrap because rich kids were busy stealing the broken one." By Sunday night, the video had 80,000 views. By Monday morning, a local news station emailed MS Harper. By lunch, Derek looked like he had swallowed a bolt. Vanessa stopped making eye contact. The school tried to celebrate my state win with a morning announcement. Principal Marsh read it over the PA. Students clapped in first period. Then Derek ruined his own day. He stood in the hallway after second period and said, "Enjoy being a charity case celebrity." I turned around. Students slowed down. I said, "Say it louder." Derek smirked. Derek said, "You heard me." I stepped closer. I said, "No, I want the local news camera to hear you." He looked left. Mike stood 10 feet away with a phone. Beside him was a reporter waiting to interview MS Harper about the project. Derek's face changed. Mike waved. Mike said, "Charity case celebrity, take two." The reporter lifted her eyebrows. Derek walked away. A sophomore yelled, "Run, trust fund." The clip hit the forum before the final bell. The next day, Derek issued an apology written by an adult. Mike read it out loud in the parking lot. Mike said, "My words did not reflect my values, bro. Your words are your values wearing sneakers." Vanessa tried to separate herself from him. She posted, "I never condone cruelty." I commented with a screenshot of her message about poor people struggle stuff. She deleted the post. The district review finished 3 days later. Vanessa's suspended scholarship nomination was revoked. Her state fair disqualification stood. Her college application materials had to be amended. Wherever school verification was involved, Mr. Grant was removed from senior recommendation duties pending further review. He still came to school, but his office door stayed closed. Students stopped asking him for help. He stopped looking at me. For 2 weeks, I worked, practice exams, project refinements, scholarship forms, garage shifts. Mom left sandwiches on my desk when she came home late. Dad fixed the truck in the driveway while I tested code on the porch. Sometimes Mike came over and read flashcards badly on purpose. Mike shouted, "Photosynthesis is when plants do taxes." I threw a pencil at him. He ducked and said, "Great reflexes." Harvard, the National Merit Academic Challenge exam came first. Westbridge sent 4 students to the Regional Testing Center, me, 2 juniors, and Vanessa as an alternate because the paperwork had been submitted before the review ended. Derek drove her there in his SUV. She wore a gray sweater and no smile. Before we entered, she walked up to me near the glass doors. Vanessa said quietly, "Please don't make today harder." I adjusted my backpack. I said, "I'm here to take a test." She glanced at Derek, then back at me. Vanessa said, "You know everyone is watching me." I said, "Then give them something honest to see." Derek stepped over. Derek snapped, "You just can't stop, can you?" I said, "I stopped months ago. That's the problem for you." The proctor opened the doors. We tested for 4 hours. No speeches, no tricks. Just paper, pencils, and silence. When I walked out, Mike waited in the parking lot with 2 burgers. Mike said, "How bad did you kill it?" I took one. I said, "Clean." Vanessa came out 8 minutes later, pale and stiff. Derek asked her something. She snapped back at him. He threw his hands up. The regional results posted 10 days later. I ranked first in the state. Vanessa did not qualify for nationals through the exam. The same day, my academic fair project advanced to the national finals through the state competition. Westbridge had to put my photo on the front page of the school website. They chose one from the farm demo, me kneeling beside the rig with dirt on my jeans. Mike said, "You look like a mechanic who defeated a calculator." Mom printed the page and taped it to the fridge. Dad pretended not to stare at it while drinking coffee. The attention brought new people around. Students who had ignored me asked for help. Teachers who never learned my name said congratulations. Amber tried to smile at me in English class. I said, "No." She said, "I didn't say anything." I said, "Good." Vanessa's circle shrank. Derek still walked beside her. but they fought in low voices near lockers and stairwells. One afternoon, I heard him hiss, "My dad stuck his neck out for you." Vanessa snapped back, "Your dad didn't write my essays either." Mike heard it too. Mike looked at me. Mike whispered, "Trouble in Parasite Paradise." In late March, college decisions started rolling out. A few students got into state schools. One girl got into Cornell and cried so hard the nurse brought tissues. Vanessa had counted on early praise from several universities. Instead, she got application under additional review, emails from 3 schools that had received updates from Westbridge. She cornered me after senior seminar. Vanessa said, "You've ruined everything." I put my notebook in my backpack. I said, "No, I removed my name from your work, that's all." Vanessa's voice broke. Vanessa said, "You don't get it, people like me have to be perfect." I zipped the bag. I said, "People like me have to be useful until we're allowed to be seen." She stared. I walked past her. In the hallway, Derek waited. Derek said, "National finals are in Chicago, right?" I said, "Yes." Derek smiled without humor. Derek said, "Big city, big stage, lots can happen." I stepped close enough that his smile faded. I said, "Then bring better threats. The old ones got boring." He shoved his hands in his pockets and walked away. I emailed Ms. Harper about the exchange. She forwarded it to Principal Marsh. Principal Marsh told me to avoid Derek and report contact. I did both until Derek made that impossible. The night before the bus left for Chicago, I was closing at Lawson's garage when Derek pulled up with Tyler in the passenger seat. Vanessa was not with them. Mr. Lawson had already left for a parts run. Mike was sweeping the back bay. Derek walked in holding an envelope. Derek said, "Here's how this ends." Mike leaned on the broom. Mike said, "Usually with you embarrassing yourself." Derek ignored him and tossed the envelope onto a workbench. It slid through a streak of oil. Derek said, $5,000. You miss the bus tomorrow. Say you got sick. Nobody cares. Vanessa gets breathing room. You get money your family obviously needs. I looked at the envelope. I said, "Your bribe got dirty." Derek's face tightened. Derek said, "Don't act above money. Your mom scrubs hospital floors." Mike's broom hit the concrete. Mike shouted, "Say one more word about his mom." Derek stepped toward him. I moved between them. I said, "You want me out because you know she can't win while I stand there." Tyler looked at the floor. Derek pointed at me. Derek said, "You think Chicago judges care about your sad little farm story? My dad knows people. Vanessa still has options." I wiped my hands on a rag and picked up the envelope with 2 fingers. I opened it. Cash. Crisp bills. I held it toward the security camera above the office door. I said clearly, "Derek Walsh just offered me $5,000 to skip the national finals." Derek looked up. His mouth opened. Mike lifted his phone from behind a toolbox. Mike said, "And I got the sound this time." Tyler backed toward the door. Derek lunged for Mike. I caught Derek's jacket and shoved him against the workbench. Tools rattled. I said loudly, "Leave." Derek swung his arm. I ducked, and his hand hit the metal shelf. He yelled, "Mr. Lawson's truck headlights swept across the garage door. As he pulled in, he stepped out, saw Derek, saw the cash, saw Mike recording. "Mr. Lawson said, 'Well, this looks educational.'" Derek clutched his hand. Derek snapped, "He attacked me." Mr. Lawson pointed at the camera. "Mr. Lawson said, 'Then the camera will make you famous.'" Derek grabbed the envelope. "But I stepped on it." I said, "Evidence stays." Tyler bolted. Derek left after calling me a dead man twice. Mr. Lawson locked the door and called Dad. Then he called Principal Marsh. Then he called the police non-emergency line because he said rich kids needed paperwork like everyone else. The next morning, Derek was not at school. Vanessa was. She stood near the bus with a suitcase and a stiff face. Her alternate paperwork had somehow gotten her approved to attend as a student observer, not a competitor. When she saw me, she walked over fast. Vanessa whispered, "Did you report Derek?" I loaded my project case into the bus storage compartment. I said, "Yes." Vanessa gripped her bag strap. Vanessa said, "His father is furious." I said, "Good." Vanessa glanced at the teachers. Vanessa said, "You don't understand what they'll do." I turned toward her. I said, "You keep saying that, then they do something stupid, and I record it." Her lips pressed tight. Ms. Harper called from the bus steps. Ms. Harper said, "Ethan, we're boarding." I walked past Vanessa. She followed to the bus. But Ms. Harper blocked her. Mess, Harper said. Vanessa. Your seat is in the second bus with observers, Vanessa said. I need to speak with Ethan. Mess, Harper said. No, you don't. Mike leaned out the window. Mike said, try email. Subject line, apology draft 97. The bus laughed. Vanessa stepped back as the doors closed. Chicago was colder than Westbridge and louder than anything near our school. The national finals took place in a convention center with banners, bright lights, sponsor booths, and students from every state guarding their projects like crown jewels. I kept mine simple, no flashy graphics, no buzzwords. Just the rig, soil trays, test data, and a short video from Harlan's farm. The first round of judging went clean. Judge after judge asked about cost, durability, repair, scale, and code. I answered straight. One judge in a gray suit asked, why not target commercial agriculture first? I pointed to the replacement parts laid out on the table. I said, because big operations already have vendors. Small farms need something they can fix on a Saturday without waiting 3 weeks. He nodded and wrote for 20 seconds. Mike stood behind the visitor rope giving me thumbs up like a maniac. Ms. Harper watched from the side with her arms folded. Vanessa appeared near the booth after the judges left. She had no Derek with her, no Amber, no Circle. Vanessa said quietly, you did well. I packed a sensor back into the case. I said, yes. She swallowed. Vanessa said, I'm sorry about Derek. I said, that's between Derek and the people he threatens. She stepped closer to the rope. Vanessa said, I'm sorry about the essays. I looked at her. I said, say it louder. Her eyes flicked around. Several competitors stood nearby. A judge was still within earshot. Vanessa whispered, please don't. I said, then you're not sorry, you're negotiating. She gripped the rope. Vanessa said, what do you want from me? I closed the case latch. I said, nothing. That answer hit her harder than an argument. She stepped back. Vanessa said, we used to be friends. I said, no, I used to be useful. The second round took place on stage. Finalists presented to a panel and a live audience. Vanessa sat in the middle rows with observers from Westbridge. Derek was nowhere in sight. Mr. Grant was nowhere in sight. Principal Marsh had flown in that morning after local media attention grew. She shook my hand before the presentation and said, represent yourself well. I said, yes, ma'am. On stage, the lights were hot. The microphone stood too high, so I lowered it. Some people laughed softly. I began with the rig running beside me. I said, my father drives freight. My mother cleans hospital rooms. I work at a garage. I built this because working people do not need another expensive system they can't repair. The screen showed the farm row. Water usage dropped. Crop stress indicators improved. Energy draw stayed low. I kept the words plain. Cost, build, repair, results. A judge asked, your early prototype failed. I clicked to the ugly photo of prototype A, burned and crooked. The audience laughed. I said, yes, sir, it overheated in 6 minutes. Somebody later stole that version and painted it white. It still overheated in 6 minutes. The Westbridge students made noise in the back. The judge smiled. And what did that teach you? I said, that failure is useful when you own it, dangerous when you steal it. The room clapped. The panel asked 9 more questions. I answered 9. No fluff, no panic. When I walked off stage, Mike grabbed my shoulders. Mike shouted, you smoked them. Mess, Harper said. Volume, Mike. Mike whispered loudly, you academically destroyed them. The awards were that evening. Before the ceremony, Derek finally appeared in the lobby with his father. Mr. Walsh's suit looked more expensive than the hotel carpet. Derek's hand was wrapped. Mr. Walsh walked straight toward me. Dad stepped between us. He had driven 9 hours overnight after his last route and arrived in his work jacket. Mom stood beside him, still wearing her church shoes because she said nice shoes were for nice days. Mr. Walsh said, your son has caused serious damage to mine. Dad looked at Derek's wrapped hand. Dad said, your son hit a shelf while trying to grab a phone. Mr. Walsh's face turned red. Mr. Walsh said, you people always want to drag everyone down to your level. Mom stepped forward. Mom said, our level has receipts. Mike coughed to hide a laugh. Mr. Walsh looked at me. Mr. Walsh said, withdraw your complaint about the money. Derek's future should not be damaged over a misunderstanding. I pulled my phone out. I said, want to hear the misunderstanding? Derek said. Dad, don't. Mr. Walsh grabbed his arm. Vanessa stood 20 feet away, watching. I pressed play. Derek's recorded voice said, $5,000. You missed the bus tomorrow. Say you got sick. People in the lobby turned. Mr. Walsh lunged for the phone, and Dad caught his wrist. Dad said calmly, don't. Security moved in. Mr. Walsh yanked free and straightened his jacket. Security guard said, Sir, step away from the student. Mr. Walsh hissed, This isn't over. Mom said, It is for tonight. We walked into the ceremony together. Dad's boots squeaked on the polished floor. Mom held my project program like it was a Bible. Mike kept whispering fake award predictions. Mike said, Best use of duct tape, most likely to make rich kids cry. Outstanding achievement in not being Derek, MS. Harper told him to hush 3 times and smiled on the third. The award started with honorable mentions, then category winners, then national finalists. My category came late. The host read 3rd place, not me. 2nd place, not me. Mike grabbed my sleeve. The host opened the final card. Host announced, 1st place, National Applied Science and Innovation Award, Ethan Miller, Westbridge High. The room rose before I reached the stage. Mom covered her mouth. Dad clapped like he was trying to start an engine. MS. Harper stood straight, clapping with both hands. Mike yelled, That's my grease boy. People laughed and clapped harder. I took the plaque. Cameras flashed. The host said, Ethan also receives the National Scholars Foundation Full Tuition Award, renewable for 4 years. Mom started crying then, loud enough that Dad put one arm around her. The host continued, And we are pleased to announce that several partner universities have requested interviews with Ethan for their engineering honors programs. The applause rolled again. I looked out and saw Vanessa sitting frozen. Derek sat 3 seats away. Jaw tight. Mr. Walsh stared at the floor. Principal Marsh clapped. MS. Harper clapped. My parents clapped. That was enough. After the ceremony, a reporter stopped me near the sponsor wall. Reporter asked, Ethan, your project has drawn attention because of your background and the controversy at your school. What do you want people to take from this? I held the plaque at my side. I said, Working kids don't need pity. They need people to stop standing in their way. The reporter asked, What would you say to students who are pressured to give up opportunities for someone else? I said, Help people when you can, but don't hand them your future and call it kindness. Vanessa heard it. She walked toward me after the reporter left. Her makeup had faded under the lobby lights. Vanessa said, Congratulations. I said, Thank you. She twisted her fingers around the strap of her purse. Vanessa said, I know I hurt you. I said, You used me. She nodded once. Barely, Vanessa said. I used you. It was the first honest sentence I had heard from her in years. Then she ruined it. Vanessa said, Can you tell Principal Marsh I helped you early on? Not much, just enough that colleges see I wasn't trying to steal. If you say we collaborated, maybe they'll stop reviewing my applications. I stared at her until she looked away. I said, There it is. Vanessa's face tightened. Vanessa said, Ethan, please. I'll lose everything. I said, No, you'll lose what wasn't yours. She grabbed my sleeve again, then dropped it when Mom looked over. Vanessa whispered, You already won. Why can't you be generous? I stepped back. I said, Because you call it generosity when I pay, you call it cruelty when I stop. Derek came up behind her. Derek snapped, Leave him. He loves this. I turned toward him. I said, How's your hand? Mike appeared beside me. Mike said, How's your shelf? Derek took a step, then saw security and stopped. Vanessa turned on Derek. Vanessa said sharply, This is your fault too. Derek laughed harshly. Derek said, My fault. I covered for you. Vanessa said, You made everything worse. Derek said, You needed me when you couldn't pass a practice test. Vanessa slapped him. The crack echoed across the lobby. Every phone came up. Derek grabbed his cheek. Stunned, Mr. Walsh shouted, Derek. Vanessa backed away. Breathing hard, Vanessa said, I'm done. Mike whispered, Season finale. Security stepped in before Derek could respond. I walked away with my family. The next week at Westbridge, everything changed fast. Principal Marsh held an emergency senior meeting. She announced new rules for recommendation review, project verification, and tutoring boundaries. Mr. Grant was placed on administrative leave. Dr. Levin from the district took over scholarship certifications. Tyler admitted Derek paid him $200 to open the lab cabinet. Tyler got suspended and lost his assistant position. Derek got suspended for threats, bribery, and harassment. His father resigned from the booster board after the district opened a conflict of interest investigation into donations tied to student recommendations. The science wing still had his family name on the wall, but students started taping paper labels over it. One said, "Shelf Injury Research Center." Vice Principal Cole took it down and failed to hide his smile. Vanessa's consequences came in pieces. First, the state fair finalized her disqualification, then Westbridge sent academic integrity updates to colleges where she had used school-certified materials, then her Honor Society membership was suspended, then the local paper ran a short article about the national winner and the school's plagiarism review. It did not name her, but everyone knew. Her table in the cafeteria emptied. Amber sat somewhere else. Derek stopped coming for 2 weeks. Vanessa ate in the courtyard with headphones on. One afternoon, she stood at the announcement board where my national award photo had been posted. I walked up to pin a tutoring schedule for underclassmen, real tutoring, group sessions, no essays, no private favors. She looked at the flyer. Vanessa said, "So now you help people." I pinned the bottom corner. I said, "People who do their own work." She nodded slowly. Vanessa said, "I got rejected from Northbridge." I said nothing. Vanessa said, "Waitlisted at Hampton. Review hold at Lakeview." I stepped back from the board. Vanessa said, "My mom says we may have to move after graduation." I picked up my bag. Vanessa said bitterly, "You don't care?" I said, "No." She looked at me like I had slapped her. I continued, "I don't celebrate it either. I'm just not carrying it." She looked down. Vanessa said, "I really thought you'd always be there." I said, "That was your mistake." I left her by the board. My own college news came on a Thursday at 5:42 p.m. I was in the garage replacing brake pads when my phone buzzed. Email, Millstone University. Honors Engineering Program, full tuition covered by the National Scholars Foundation, housing grant added, research placement offered, summer bridge program invited. I read it once, then handed the phone to Mr. Lawson. He squinted. "Mr. Lawson said, that a yes?" I said, "That's a yes." He wiped his hands on his shirt and shouted toward the office, "The kid's out." Dad arrived 10 minutes later because Mr. Lawson called him before I did. Mom arrived still in scrubs, hair net marks across her forehead. Mike arrived with a grocery store cake that said, "You did it, Eric," because they got my name wrong and he got a discount. Mom hugged me so hard my ribs hurt. Dad held out his hand, then pulled me into a hug anyway. Dad said gruffly, "Good work, son." Mr. Lawson shoved a socket wrench into my hand. Mr. Lawson said, "For your dorm, never trust campus furniture." Mike cut the cake with a plastic putty knife and said, "To Eric," I said, "My name is Ethan." Mike raised his slice. Mike said, "Not according to the bakery." Monday morning, Westbridge put the college acceptance on the big screen in the lobby. "Congratulations, Ethan Miller, Millstone Honors Engineering, full scholarship." Students clapped when I walked in. Some meant it, some followed the crowd. Mike bowed beside me like he was my bodyguard. Vanessa stood near the stairs. She watched the screen, then walked over. Her voice was low. Vanessa said, "Millstone was my dream school." I looked at the screen. I said, "Mine too." Vanessa swallowed. Vanessa said, "Can you tell them I helped with your early project? Maybe not officially, just if they ask." Mike barked a laugh. Vanessa flinched. I turned toward her. I said, "You stole my failed prototype, submitted my writing, lied to the school, and tried to frame me in a hallway." Vanessa whispered. I said I was sorry. I said, "You said it when you needed something." Students had stopped moving. The lobby listened. Vanessa's eyes filled. Vanessa said, "You have everything now." I shook my head. I said, "No, I have what I earned." Derek appeared at the front doors in a wrinkled hoodie, back from suspension. He saw the screen. He saw us. He laughed once. Derek said, "Full ride, cute, still not our class." Dad's voice came from behind me. Dad had come to school for a meeting with Principal Marsh about the scholarship ceremony. Dad said, "Good, your class seems expensive and defective." The lobby erupted. Derek stared at him. Dad stepped beside me in his work jacket, cap in hand. Dad said, "You must be the boy who tried to buy my son for $5,000. Derek's mouth opened. Dad said, "Bad offer." Mike whispered, "Fatality." Principal Marsh came out of the office. Principal Marsh said, "Derek, my office, now." Derek pointed at Dad. Derek said, "He insulted me." Dad said, "No, I appraised you." Principal Marsh turned away fast, but I saw her mouth twitch. Derek went into the office. Vanessa stayed in the lobby, alone again, at the scholarship ceremony in May. Westbridge tried to look polished. Folding chairs lined the gym, parents filled the bleachers, a banner hung over the stage, senior honors night. My parents sat in the front row. Dad wore a shirt with buttons, Mom wore a blue dress and kept smoothing it over her knees. Mike sat behind them with his mother, who kept telling him to stop bouncing his leg. Vanessa sat 4 rows back with her mother. Derek sat on the aisle with his father. Both silent. Mr. Grant did not attend. Ms. Harper presented the National Scholars Award. She stood at the podium and looked right at me. Ms. Harper said, "This student's work demonstrates rigor, persistence, originality, and an unwillingness to let pressure define his future." I walked up, she handed me the certificate and whispered, "Well done." I said, "Thank you." The applause lasted longer than I expected. After I sat down, Principal Marsh announced policy reforms and new independent checks for recommendations that got polite applause from adults and real applause from students who had been ignored for years. Then came a surprise. Mr. Harlan, the farmer from the demo, walked onto the stage in his seed cap. He cleared his throat at the microphone. Mr. Harlan said, "I don't speak fancy. This kid built something that worked. He showed up on time, answered straight, and didn't treat farmers like a charity case. So a few of us put together a tool grant for his summer build." He held up an envelope. "It ain't millions, but it's honest." The gym stood. Dad clapped with both hands over his head. Mom cried again. Mike shouted, "Eric, Eric, Eric." The whole back row joined. I took the envelope and shook Mr. Harlan's hand. I said, "Thank you, sir." Mr. Harlan said, "Build the next one stronger." I said, "Yes, sir." After the ceremony, Vanessa approached with her mother. Mrs. Blake looked thinner without sunglasses. Vanessa held herself stiff. Mrs. Blake said, "Ethan, Vanessa has something to say." Vanessa looked at the floor. Vanessa said, "I'm sorry for taking credit for your work. I'm sorry for asking you for money. I'm sorry for lying about you." Mike stopped mid-cake bite behind me. Mom stood quietly beside Dad. I said, "Thank you for saying it." Vanessa looked up, hope flashing. Vanessa said, "Would you be willing to write a statement that says I apologized and that you accept it?" There it was again. Dad made a low sound. Mrs. Blake gripped Vanessa's arm. Mrs. Blake whispered, "Vanessa, Vanessa." Rushed on. Vanessa said, "Not to erase everything, just to help with my appeal. The community college honors track said they might consider me later if there's evidence I made amends." I said, "Write your own statement. Tell the truth. Don't use my name as a ladder." Vanessa's eyes hardened through the tears. Vanessa said, "You always make me beg." Mom stepped forward. Mom said, "No, honey." He finally stopped answering. Mrs. Blake pulled Vanessa back. Mrs. Blake said quietly, "Enough." They left. Derek tried one last time in the parking lot. He leaned against his SUV, keys in hand, acting like suspension had not stripped half his shine. Derek said, "Enjoy your scholarship, Miller. Some of us don't need one." I walked past with the certificate under my arm. I said, "Some of us can keep one." Mike made a choking noise. Derek stepped off the curb. Dad turned around. Derek stopped again. Dad said, "Boy, every time you move toward my son, you remember garage cameras and weak shelves." Derek got into his SUV and slammed the door. 3 days later, news spread that Derek's father had pulled him from Westbridge before graduation ceremonies and enrolled him in a private remedial program out of state. Mike called it rich kid exile. Tyler transferred too. Mr. Grant resigned before the district hearing finished. The official email said, "Personal reasons." Ms. Harper read it, looked at me over her coffee, and said, "Personal reasons often arrive after professional consequences." Graduation came under a bright June sky on the football field. I wore a cap and gown over a shirt Mom ironed twice. Dad arrived early to get seats. Mom brought tissues and denied bringing tissues while holding tissues. Mike decorated his cap with "Bakery," said Eric, in silver letters. Vanessa walked across the stage when her name was called. The applause was thin but not cruel. She took her diploma and went back to her seat. No crown, no circle, no Derek, just a girl who had to Walk without someone else holding the floor under her feet. When my name was called, the applause hit hard. Ethan Miller. I crossed the stage. Principal Marsh shook my hand. Dr. Levin shook my hand. Ms. Harper stood at the faculty row and clapped. From the front bleachers, Dad shouted, "That's my boy." Mom cried into the tissues she claimed she did not bring. I took the diploma, turned toward the field, and saw everything clearly because it was all outside me, not trapped in my chest. The school, the stage, the people who doubted, the people who helped, the people who used me, the people who stood with me. After the ceremony, a local reporter found me near the fence. Reporter asked, "Ethan, you've had quite a senior year, national champion, full scholarship, and a public fight over academic integrity. Any final words before college?" I held my diploma in one hand and the Tool grant envelope in the other. Mike stood nearby making a face behind the camera until his mother smacked his arm. Vanessa lingered near the parking lot, listening. I said, "Yes, next time you ask a poor kid to give up his future, make sure you're not standing on everything he built." The reporter smiled. Reporter asked, "And what comes next?" I looked at Dad's old pickup, at Mom waving me over, at Mr. Lawson leaning on the fence, at Ms. Harper talking with Principal Marsh, at Mike pretending to sign autographs for freshmen. I said, "I build, I study, I keep my name on my own work." Vanessa walked over one final time before I left. No crowd, no tears, no performance. Vanessa said, "Goodbye, Ethan." I nodded. I said, "Goodbye, Vanessa." She waited for more. I gave her nothing else. Dad started the pickup. The engine coughed, caught, and held steady because we had replaced the bad starter with my prize money. Mom opened the passenger door and said, "Come on, college boy." Mike shouted from across the lot, "Don't forget us when you're famous, Eric." I shouted back, "Learn my name first." He raised both hands. Mike yelled, "Never." I climbed into the truck with my diploma on my lap. Westbridge High shrank behind us as Dad pulled onto the road. The old truck rolled forward, not fancy, not quiet, but ours. This time, nobody sat on my back, nobody held my form, nobody spent my hours and called it love. I had a full ride, a national title, a family still standing, and a future with my own name stamped on every page.